Thanks for joining us on Over My Dead Body, the podcast hosted by Nichola and Carl that aims to bust those myths about all things funerals and answer the questions you never dared ask. So stick in your earbuds, listen, and then send us your questions for the things we still haven't answered for you. Happy listening. So welcome back to Over My Dead Body, Series 3, Episode 10. And I am no longer alone. Carl, you are back.
Yes, hello everybody. It's good to be back and sitting opposite you, Nichola. It's great. Great to be here.
Good holiday?
Yes, it was a lovely, relaxing holiday. 10 days in the sun, so can't complain. A little bit of sickness, but we'll leave that for now.
We'll leave that for now. Well, you are glowing beautifully across the table from me. So
yeah, the tan's come on quite well.
That doesn't look like it's out of a bottle.
It definitely isn't.
So before we crack on with today's episode, I just wanted to take you back, Carl, to a question that we got asked quite a while ago. I can't even remember what episode it was, about whether we ever get nervous around funerals. And I know yesterday you had one of the biggest of your career. So did you get nervous? Tell us all about it.
Yes. So yesterday we had the funeral for Robin Blair, a local man from Darlington, very well known, stalwart of the markets, indoor market trader, and a real old school gent. And as we say, yesterday we really pulled out all the stops. So we made sure that the family had everything they wanted. We ended up sort of doing a little route through Darlington, and we stopped outside the market where he traded for many, many years. The family had been there for generations. So the nerve side of things, I wasn't nervous particularly on the day as such, because I knew we'd have everything in place, and we always double check and triple check everything to make sure that the family get exactly what they want. But it's sort of it hits you when you realise the magnitude of the service, when you walk around the corner and you never know what to expect. So when you say that the cortege is going to be passing through the marketplace, there could be nobody there, or there could be hundreds or thousands. But when we turned the corner as we walked into the market square, yeah, there was a few there, and that sort of takes your breath away. And it's a proud moment to lead the cortege into that particular setting, and to make sure that the family were. I mean, they really were very upset, but they were sort of touched that there must have been over 500 in the marketplace, 500-600 maybe. So the nerves were there, but I knew that we had everything under control. Yeah. And then same when we got to church, we took our time. We made sure that we had plenty of time to get everybody together, let the family gather their thoughts, and then we headed into the service. There must have been a good 200 at the service as well. So yeah, it was a big day, but one to be proud of, certainly.
Well done. On behalf of all of us in the industry, well done. There's been lots of media coverage locally about it today, and you look brilliant in that, walking alongside the hearse.
Yes, the tan helped. So yeah, it makes it look like a ghost walking across Darlington markets. So yeah, all good.
Brilliant. Well done. Well done. So on to this week's episode, and it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. I am sure all of you listeners will have heard and watched some of the evidence and the statements coming out last week in the sentencing of Robert Bush, the funeral director from Legacy in Hull, who had pleaded guilty to a number of different charges, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison last week. And we felt, having brought you so many episodes on so many topics, that we couldn't just ignore that was happening. It's one of the biggest things to happen in the industry for a while. And we know that it really has shattered quite a lot of trust and confidence in what funeral directors do. But actually, the majority of them out there are absolutely brilliant and are not Robert Bush and do not behave like him. So we wanted to address some of that today. So you might have heard another voice on our mics already, and we are delighted to welcome back David Knowles. So David, welcome back.
Thank you again for having me on.
And it's an absolute pleasure. And the reason we wanted David to come back and have a chat with us is because you've seen a lot in your experience. You've been in many funeral homes, and therefore probably have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly in your lifetime, I guess.
Yeah, I was called a veteran of a funeral director veteran in the paper the other day.
Can you be a veteran at 21, David?
At 21, yeah. I wish I was. But I wouldn't have put myself in the veteran category just yet, but... But no, yeah, I've seen a lot over nearly 30 years. Nothing quite like this, though, I've got to say. Nothing that's touched so many people across the country and annoyed, not just communities and the families that are impacted, but also people like us that are working in the profession. Yeah, it's been a sad few months, and then especially last week.
So more than anything, before we get into a conversation, we, of course, feel for every single family that's been affected and has been touched by the actions of Legacy. Our thoughts are with you. We can't imagine what you're going through. And we just hope that you now feel like you have some sort of answers. It'll never be enough. But more than anything in this conversation, just know that our thoughts are with you. Also, just need to say that the opinions that we're going to express tonight are the opinions of 3 people working in the industry who have an opinion. But they are just that. They're not representative of any group or body or organisation. It's just 3 people who have been affected by this, who are interested in it and want to try and help explain some of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really meaningful point, Nichola, because everybody seems to be having their say, whether they're in the funeral industry or they're not. And I think to have myself, David, and you here, that we can candidly talk about it and make sure that we put people's minds a little bit at ease, because unfortunately with the sentencing, this isn't the end, merely just the beginning of all of this. And I think that's an important point that people should know, that this isn't going to go away and be swept under the carpet. It really has highlighted some big issues, I think, which is it's sad that it's happened, but it's also a good thing that people are reacting in this way to make things better.
I think I said last time you invited me onto the podcast, and I've said it lots of times to people as I've spoken to them, the irony of the business being called Legacy. I do hope it does leave a legacy for people that, take on the bat from us when we retire and things, and make sure that the funeral industry is as good as what we know it to be, and it carries on like that in the future.
And I think, obviously, with your experience, with 30 years, I've been in this now for 14, and I've had the privilege of working up in sort of north of Scotland, obviously in this local area where I live in Richmond, County Durham, up into Tynemouth, North Shields. I've worked further down south, and as you said earlier, I've never seen or heard of anything like this ever before, and it has shocked me, to be fair, because I genuinely didn't think it would, anything like this would ever happen, but obviously proven wrong.
I'm in the same boat. I think, I've worked with a lot of funeral professionals. I did a short video on Friday on my own business social channels, and I said then I've worked with, funeral directors, embalmers, managers, support staff from head office when I worked at the Co-op, and the overwhelming majority of these people are decent, honest, caring. People tend to not come into the funeral industry for any other reason than they just want to help people. And dare I say it, I don't know Robert Bush's background, but very much at the beginning of his journey, I would hope that he didn't come into this to do what he did. I don't know, there's obviously something that had gone, awry there, but I would like to hope that he didn't come in with that motive.
I think we've all got to have that hope to still have a bit of faith in humanity. And sometimes people's heads get turned by greed. And what we want to try and avoid doing on this episode of the show is to talk about anything too controversial or go over and over again the details of the case that are already out there that people can go and research for themselves. We want to try and help answer some of the questions that haven't yet been addressed through the media.
And also just to restore a little bit of faith in people, and make people aware that genuinely people do care, as David said.
So what we're going to try and answer are questions either that have come in to us at the show or to us individually, where people have said, I'm really worried about what I've seen, or there are some responses, some questions that I've seen on some of the threads of reporting. So I'll ask a few of those and see where we get to with the conversation. And if we still haven't answered everything, then David, Carl and I and producer Steve are very happy to get together with another beer again and talk more if you need more. But let's see where we get to. So one of the big questions I think that people are really struggling with, because they don't know the industry as well as perhaps we do, is what actually happened. So the stealing of charity donations is quite obvious. The mis-selling of funeral plans when he had no authority to do that, so kept the money. It wasn't put in a bank account where it can be used against funeral plans. Those two things are relatively easy for most people to understand. What I've heard a lot of noise about is, well, why were there bodies in his premises for so long? What did he actually do, or what did he not do? So do you guys, can you explain that more clearly than I can about what actually happened to result in those bodies being there?
I'll try. I think I did see an interview, one of the ones the police had released, where he said that it cut off the beginning, but he said he presented him with an opportunity where he could not do the funerals and kind of backfill, I think was his words, which was pretty shocking. But I think, in a nutshell, and to put it very simply, he has been taking payments for what could be direct cremations, maybe having the service in the chapel or the room at his funeral home, and then telling the families he's then cremated their loved one as planned. He hasn't done that section of the service. And I suppose, so then people might question, well, what benefit does he get out of doing that? Well, if he's not booking a cremation time, he then doesn't get a cremation invoice. So he's taking the money from the families at whatever cost that is. And if he's doing the service within his own funeral home, I didn't know this until, again, last week, he was making his own coffins within that environment. So he really has no, or very little outlay. And if he's not cremating people's loved ones, and then, then he's taking the money and he's not spending any money. I suppose then the problem is, well, there's two problems after that, isn't there? There is one, what happens to people's ashes, and he hasn't cremated people's loved ones, so he's not getting ashes from there. So then he's giving people the ashes that aren't theirs. Where did he get those from? I don't know. I've spoken to other people in Hull that I know, and there's beliefs, but we said we weren't going to speculate on that. But the other one is, then he has the person's loved one in their care. To me, and sorry if this comes across the wrong way, but that's quite short-sighted. You don't keep someone's loved one like that, but you don't do it anyway. But then, what was he ever going to do with this in the long term? And I think in that police interview he said as well, he tried to backfill or whatever it was he said, and it just got worse. He never managed to get to that point. At some point, what he should have done, in my view, is just stopped and gone, right, I'm in trouble here, and I shouldn't be taking any more funerals. I shouldn't be. I should be trying to get, and just came clean. But he's obviously in it too deep at that point. Yeah. But that's the only thing I can think of.
I think you've covered most things there, David. And I think obviously he's gotten away with it once, so he's done it again and again and again, and that's his potentially the money-making scheme, because that's all it is a money-making scheme.
Yeah.
And as you rightly say, it just sounded it is short-sighted, because the end goal of what our industry is the official disposal of a body. He's not doing it, and where that body is going to go, I have no idea. And obviously, it then becomes a public health and hygiene problem, and there's nowhere to go from that, unfortunately. The prepayment side of things that we mentioned, and also the donations, well, yeah, that's as simple as it is. That's just theft. That's as simple as that. Yeah.
We've got to remember that the prepayment side of our profession was regulated some 4 and a bit years ago because of things like this. So there was a company out there called Safe Hands. Ironically, we ended up not being very safe, and a lot of people lost their money. I suppose they were different. They weren't, they went into financial difficulty. I saw the programme last night on Channel 2, where there was some paperwork, and it said at the top that it was I can't remember what it was the old there was a prepayment plan company that Perfect Choice that was on the letterhead. Well, to be a Perfect Choice operator years ago, he had to be a member of the NEFD. Now, we know he wasn't that, so was he also misrepresenting paperwork to get people thinking that they'd done that. And some of these people had paid them in cash, it said on that television programme last night, who can't get their money back from stuff like that. But that's why the industry was regulated. So all prepayment plan operators now have to be regulated by the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and any funeral director that's offering prepayment plans has to either be an appointed representative or an introducer appointed representative and be trained effectively to do that. So the pre-need side of our profession is already there from a regulatory point of view. We just now need
It's just the one bit of industry that's regulated.
But then there's a two-pronged question, is because who regulates us? That's the other question. Our hospital mortuaries that we attend are regulated by the Human Tissue Authority.
Yeah.
And that, rightly so, regulates people's loved ones and the care there. But we have another side of funeral services where we look after the living. There is an element of looking after and dealing with vulnerable people. I don't know whether the Human Tissue Authority's regulatory structure forms part of that. I think we sit across probably two regulators, and what we do with and helping and support the living, and what we do to help and support the deceased is got to probably be regulated separately.
Potentially, yes. Yeah, and I think if we go back to the prepayment side of things, there are safeguarding issues as well. So if somebody does come in wanting a funeral plan who is potentially very vulnerable, years ago there were no questions asked. You just sell, yes, whatever you want. Whereas nowadays, as you say,
The vulnerability,
isn't it? Yeah, you have to make sure that they are financially sound, they're sound in mind as well as everything else.
Capable of making decisions.
That's it, capable of making decisions for themselves. And I think that's a really important point. But as we say, that's pretty much well on the way now. And I know I've got to jump through certain hoops. We get regularly, we do have the phone calls that come in pretending they're wanting a funeral plan, and you get graded. And if you fall below that grade and you're not up to selling it, you're taken off. And you say, right, you need retraining, simple as. And we welcome all of those, and that's I'm up for all of those certainly. And that's we're in a better place. Yes, there could be more done, and there is being more done, and we'll only grow and get better in time. Now it's the funerals, the actual at-needs funerals that we need to be focusing on and pushing forward.
Loads to unpick in there already that we wanted to get to, and lots of questions that have come in on a number of those topics. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, David, because you made me go out and buy the Daily Express on a Saturday. You made me do that. But I know you had some comments that you made to the media about perhaps there being more people or operators like Robert Bush out there. He might not be the only one who was operating in such a way. So before everybody panics and thinks, oh my God, it's everybody, it isn't. I want to quantify that with you. We're saying it is a minority. But you do believe there are perhaps other people operating in similar ways up and down the country?
Yes and no. I believe there will be issues in other parts of the country. I don't think anything will be as the severity of Robert Bush and legacy in Hull. But the question that the reporter asked me on the phone was, do I think there's other funeral directors that will be worried at the minute? And I said, I do. I do think there will be. It might be that their premises aren't to an adequate standard. It might be that their care of people's ashes isn't as good as it could be. It could be that their standards just aren't as... there's a lot of funeral directors across the country that have been funeral directors for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. They've come through generations of families, and they've taken over families and the family businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of old-fashioned practices, let's put it that way, in and around our profession. Like I say, I'm not saying for a minute that there's somebody else doing things to the level that Robert Bush was, but I do think there's people out there that need to up their game. And it doesn't. We see people at crematoriums, we see people in industry settings where you do think to yourself, wow, you could be a little bit better there, or. Yeah. And I'm not being disrespectful to anybody, and that, again, is my opinion. But yeah, I do believe there'll be people out there that significantly need to up their standards, and regulation will do that, because when regulation does come in, which I'm sure now it will, people would need to be visited, they'll need to be assessed, they'll need to prove that the owners of the business have the necessary qualifications to run a funeral directors. There's funeral directors out there, I know, and owners of businesses that aren't qualified. They own the business because that's what they've always done. They've never had a professional qualification in what they do. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah,
I feel like I misquoted you as badly as the Daily Express did there. I'm so sorry. So let's be clear that David is not saying.
the reason why you're not a reporter.
Yes, there is.
He also called me a veteran funeral director,
Which is not a good start.
which was not a good start. No, I didn't. He didn't misquote me as such. It was just that I said that there was going to be. I think there was people out there that would be a little bit worried.
So it's more that standards may not be to the quality that people would perhaps expect in terms of administration and running a business, rather than we think this is happening in lots of places.
Yes,
Perfect.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think it is a good point that you say about the businesses that have got, that have been going for so long, where they sort of say, well, this is how we've always done it. And they're not open to change. They're not open to the new ways of working. And that's the thing, is that funeral directors who aren't open to change and just think that's how we've always done it, and that's not necessarily the right way to do it. And I think that's a really big point, is that funeral directors are going to have to change their ways and their ways of working to be part of this industry. And I think that's only a good thing.
I wonder if we see a duplication of what happened in the prepayment planning world when that was regulated. I don't know these figures for definite, but it was somewhere in the region of before prepayment plan regulation. So there was 60 to 70 prepayment plan companies out there selling prepayment plans or offering prepayment plans to funeral directors. Once regulation came, I don't think there's more than 10 now. Yeah. A lot of them decided not to continue. And will we see another part of that with funeral directors that don't want to change? They don't want to be part of a regulated environment. And they might use it as an opportunity to just think, do you know what, I'll retire. And I think there's a few of those out there as well, if I'm honest, that don't, not because they don't care, just because it's not the environment that they want to be working in. People, there's funeral directors out there that will run their own businesses because they want to run their own businesses. They don't want a regulator telling them how to run their business. But in reality, because of the impact, because of the actions of Robert Bush and others historically, regulation has to come, and we all have to do what we do anyway, but everybody has to conform and do whatever the future regulation states, and it can only be a good thing. And any funeral director, to me, that is not for regulation, there's a big red flag there.
Yeah, and I agree. So they almost don't deserve to be within the industry. And as you say, I agree with you, David. I genuinely think that there will be funeral directors who do call it a day, and I think it's not because that they're doing anything wrong. It's, as you say, they just don't want to conform and just say, well, this is how I'm doing it and I'm not being told. But again, that within lies regulation that has to come in. So,
and there's a couple of things just to pick up on, because I think funeral directors were very often built on trust. They were seen as those pillars of the community. They were the people that families turned to in the darkest of times, that they were just seen in the same light as kind of policemen or vicars, and actually therefore they're saying, well, why do you need to regulate me? Why do I need to? Because this business is built on trust. And just one other thing, picking up on what you said, David, you said I think some funeral directors aren't qualified, but neither do they have to be.
No.
Is that correct?
Yeah, they don't. No, because we're not regulated, there doesn't need to be a qualification.
But there is a funeral director qualification should somebody want to do it.
Yes, there's the diploma in funeral directing that's offered by the National Association of Funeral Directors. There'll be the large corporate. I can only speak on behalf of the co-op because I obviously was there for a lot of years, but they do their own internal MBQs with various different learners. It was Learn Direct when I was there. I'm sure it'll be a different one now. But they will offer different levels of MBQs. There's a diploma in funeral directing. The British Institute of Funeral Directors also have a licensed funeral director qualification. But in my view, it should be, when the regulator does step forward, and we are in that world, is that if you are the owner of a funeral business, you need to hold, the top qualification. If you are a funeral director employed by that, you would have, a tier down. If you're a funeral service operative, then so you've got that level of, because there's a whole difference between a funeral director within an organisation and somebody that's running that organisation.
Absolutely.
And I think that the level of qualifications probably need to be different. So do they need to bring in more qualifications for people to do and sit, and give people the opportunity that aren't qualified to become qualified? But that goes back to the question of, if you're 65-year-old and you're running your own independent funeral director and somebody tells you you've got to do a 4-year qualification.
Do you want to go back to college?
Do they want to do that? And they might make a decision. Luckily, we'll have a lot of people out there that will already be qualified, and they'll be like, yeah. Well,
I mean, the other side is it potentially might inspire people to get on, and
hope
people
so.
within the funeral industry might think, do you know what, I can do this and I can get on with it. You know, I think that's a good thing.
We've started to talk a little bit there about regulation, and I think that's been one of the biggest shocks for people in general, that the industry wasn't regulated, that there were no kind of operating standards, no checks, nobody was coming into your premises to see what was going on. And I think that's really been where a lot of the anger from the public in general has been directed. So if we start to think about regulation, David, I know you're a massive advocate, you've talked about it before. What are some of the minimum standards? What should people expect as an absolute minimum, the care that their loved one should receive in the care of a funeral director?
I think it starts from the first call. I think when they ring a funeral director, the funeral director needs to explain the process at that time. If somebody's passed away at home, they need to explain that, we'll come out to bring their loved one into our care. I think it's about identifying who the next of kin is, who your contact is going to be, explaining where you are taking that person's loved one. And when I say where, I mean an address of where that person is going to. We ring families when we get there to say, just to let you know that mum's arrived at the funeral home, okay? And and if it's at 3 o'clock in the morning, we ask if they want that phone call. I think once people's loved ones are in the care of a funeral director, they need to be in a proper industry standard, temperature controlled environment. I know you know what I'm talking about there, but listeners may not. That means hospital standard refrigeration with individual areas for people, so they're not just in a mass cold room. We would place, I don't know what each funeral director does, but we would place massage cream and moisturiser on people so they don't get any kind of dehydration. I think things like identification checks. Most, if not all, funeral directors will have an identification procedure where you are monitoring the person's identity all the way through the process. That's bringing the person's loved one into the funeral director's care, whether any embalming's taken place, placing that person into their coffin, final checks before the day of the funeral, and a physical check with two people all the way through that process. I think the regulator probably also needs to look at qualifications. Who works there and what are they qualified to do? I know we've just spoke about qualifications, and there'll be people out there that aren't. They might be able to be qualified by experience. I think you were mentioning earlier, but there needs to be an overhaul for me of from the person, the moment the person passes away and where they pass away, to the minute that person's ashes are returned to that client. There needs to be a step process each time that families are aware of what should happen. I think families should also not be scared to ask questions and see that there is not a funeral director that I know that would say no to a family coming in and saying, can I ask you some questions? There might be some funeral directors out there that might say no to seeing the areas that they care for loved ones, and I've said, and I've made it quite public, that I wouldn't stop anybody coming to my place and seeing. What I would have to do, though, is protect people's identity.
Of course.
There's a difference between saying, can I just stop you and I'll just go and tie you up. I wouldn't need to do that, but can I just go and protect people's identity first before I bring you into that environment? So then, we're not breaking anybody's trust. But yeah, I think the regulator's got a hard job to do in doing it.
It's an absolutely impossible job, I think. Well, it's not impossible, but it is a very, very big mountain to climb. And I think the other problem that we come across as funeral directors is that everybody thinks that they have high standards, but in other areas, in some certain funeral directors, the standards aren't that high at all. And the process that you have literally just explained is where I sit as a funeral director as well. And the conversations you have right at the beginning with a family are very important. It builds the trust, and you set your stall out very early. Whether that conversation is happening at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, even if you think that family aren't taking any of it in, you still have that conversation to cover every area to make sure that, and if that family then ring you in the morning and say, "Crikey, what did you say to me again last night?" And you say, "Right, we'll go through it again." And we'll go through it as many times as that family needs so that they understand exactly what's going on. And from that point, you then build that trust and rapport with families. And I agree with you on the open house as such. We would recommend it as Seton Lang would openly let people in. It's no problem. And again, it is that point of, hang on a minute, I'm just going to go and sweep the back. That's not it. It is just to protect people. And, we welcome it, certainly. And it has highlighted it. And we do have families before their loved one has passed say, "Are we all right just to come in, have a look round?" Of course, we don't show them around the back and things, but we let them come into the funeral home, say, "Turn up whenever you like." And obviously, if we don't have other families in, then we're more than welcome to showing the funeral home. And we've been doing that as well with care home staff as well, to let them see that the operational standards that we operate to are very high. And I think that's going to be the make and break, is that bar, where it's set. And that's where we say about some funeral directors not being able to do it.
And just building on that talks very much about care of the family and care of their loved one. Are there any processes in place, or do there need to be any, that guarantees to a family that you're doing what you said you were going to do? And by that, I mean booking somebody into the crematorium or to the church or a cemetery, that flowers have been ordered if you're taking money for that. But how do you manage that? Because you're taking money off them. And then how do they know that you're spending that on the things that you said you were going to spend it on? I guess what I'm saying is, how do they know a cremation, if it's direct, is actually booked in?
Yeah, again, I can only speak on behalf of kind of our business and the ones I've known, but from a direct cremation point of view, I would always confirm what time that's going to take place. Families have a choice with us. They can use the crematorium of choice. Once we get that time, we would email the family and say, "This is the time that the direct cremation is going to take place. This is the time we'll leave the funeral home. And I will ring you when we're leaving the crematorium, or one of my team will ring you when we're leaving the crematorium to let you know that everything went to plan. And then we'll ring you the following day when we've got mum's or dad's ashes back with us." Again, though, that's a trust thing. I'm telling them that. Carl, I'm sure you do the same thing.
You could be calling them from your back garden. You're
Correct.
not, but you could.
Yeah, it could be. So I suppose, is this for something for the regulatory in the future? Do families have a system where they can check for that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that would work. I think when we talk about checks, when somebody passes away, they have to register a death. All deaths have to be registered, and the funeral directors are given a green form. Primarily, it can be a Form 6 if the coroner is involved, but there's various descriptions of a similar document depending on the mode of somebody's passing, and there's a slip on the bottom of those that have to be returned to the registrar that says that funeral's taken place. So my question in this has all been, well, where were those slips? Yeah. There has been something in the paper on the news today where the Hull Council have been asked about their process, and it could be that people weren't aware of it. In my local area, if somebody hasn't, if Stockton registrars haven't had their green slip back, within 6 to 7 weeks, they'll be on the phone to say, "What happened with Mr. Smith? Where was he cremated? Where was he buried? We haven't had that back." And I can go to and say, "Right, it was on that day and that time." Go to that cemetery or that crematorium and say, "Oh, the registrars have not had that slip back." "Oh, haven't they?" "Oh, well." But at least that's questions coming. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, in Hull, did they not review that more often? Could there have been something there that, had they have done that sooner, people it would have been flagged that these people hadn't been cremated or buried. That poses a bit of a question. Where that lies, I don't know.
And to be very clear, we are not accusing anybody of anything. We are just saying for those of us who work with that process day in, day out, there seems to be a gap that we don't currently understand.
Why wasn't there a red flag come up of, we registered Mrs. Smith's death on this date, and 6 months down the line, we haven't had confirmation that Mrs. Smith has been buried or cremated in a certain location. That red flag should have shot. Why did it not?
There's certain processes that have failed there, haven't there?
Yeah, or there's other things that could have been at play. But it was a question that shot to my mind straight away when you read all these things but that's because we're funeral professionals, right?
Yeah, that's
nobody else would be thinking, what about the green fall? Nobody else would be thinking like that.
And I think going back to the direct cremation parts for us, and again, only speaking for the business I work with, sometimes when the families, they turn up at the crematorium gates. So, we'll say to them, yes, the funeral's taking place on Wednesday, whatever date, and then the time is 8:30. We will be at the crematorium at 8:30. And inevitably, when we drive through the gates, the family are stood there. And that's a family decision, obviously, that they're not there to prove that it's taken place. It's just their final sort of paying their respects to their loved one. And then sometimes we do stop and we let that family have maybe 10 seconds just for a pause, and then we'll move on. So, not that I'm saying everybody should turn up at those early hours in the morning, but it does happen, and I think that helps prove what we are doing is we are actually taking that funeral on and following it through to the end.
And it answers Nicola's question as well, in that people have the right, when they know when the cremation's taking place, where and when and what time, they can go. And if they feel that they want to, it puts their mind at rest that it's taking place, but it also gives them the respect that they... Could technology help? I'm thinking off the cuff here. Could there be I know this sounds ridiculous, but something a bit better than this, but could there be a, similar to an Apple AirTag that is placed with people's loved ones, so families can see where their loved one is at any given point.
Yeah, but I mean that's a really interesting point, because over the years people have come up with different ideas, but again, when everybody comes into a funeral home, there has to be an identification name tag. So 3 points on there, the name, date of birth, date of death, and where they've come from. So within that particular wrist tag, could there be some technology that stays with that person, but again, that can't be removed? It has to stay with the person. So again, it's a good point.
A system that I use is able to print wrist tags that have QR codes on them, and you can scan the QR code from the wrist tag, and the QR code is on the temperature controlled area as well. So it tells the system where that person is within the funeral home. If that's online, that system. So if families had access to that, they would be able to see that, I suppose. So I think that could work.
So listening to both of you talking about regulation and how we can help rebuild some trust and confidence, it is a massive job. But it sounds like technology could help us, but the funeral industry is not the most technologically advanced industry, is it?
It's not really suited for AI just yet. But there are certain advantages that'll come and walk into the crematorium and just. But again, obviously, you would be fine. But it is a difficult one.
So something else that has cropped up this week that people seem to be quite surprised and angry about. Do spot checks ever happen on premises? And if they do, who are they undertaken by?
So for ourselves, again, just speaking for us, we are part of the NAFD, so the National Association of Funeral Directors, and they have their team who come out and regularly check, and they come through, they check the premises. What they will do is they'll go into the back of house, the mortuaries, and into the chapels, and they will check the coffin plates. So if they're into the chapels, they'll check the coffin plates, that it matches the ID tags, and then they'll go through all of the arrangement forms as well and check that everything is as it should be, and that's where they sit with that. Do you agree, David?
Yeah. So I'm also a member of the National Association of Funeral Directors. There is the Society of Allied and Independent Funeral Directors as well, which both of which, although they're not regulators, are the best things that we have in today's situation. So they come every 2 years. and it's probably a 2.5 hours, 3 hours. All the things that Carl mentioned. They'll look at the way you hold ashes and look after people's ashes. They'll look at your administration and how you are communicating with families. They'll look at how you are identifying people, what records you have in place to make sure that everything is recorded.
They also look at the presentation of people as well. So how are people being stored? Are they sufficiently covered, or and this sounds terrible. Or does it look like they've just been thrown in there?
Yeah.
Thrown in, not placed into, and just, and that's another big point, I think. Yeah.
And then to break it down a little bit to general cleanliness of the funeral home. The staff's attitudes, the stuff like they'll talk to people. Do I think 2 years, every 2 years is right? Personally, no. I think it should be sooner, more often than that. A year at the most. I don't know what kind of how it works of when they go where. Does it? Do they have like a red list, an amber list, and a green list kind of thing? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just putting it out there.
I mean, if there is anybody listening from the NAFD, we welcome them to come on and have a chat. Certainly.
Yeah. I was shocked, and again, this isn't, and I've raised this with the NAFD, so it's nothing that would be a surprise to them. When I opened in my own name, and I registered to become a member of the NAFD, I was told that I had to do 15 funerals before they would accept my application. And I got a bit difficult with that and said, hang on, so you're going to let me deal with 15 families before you'll even look at my application? And that's their rules, that's in their, the constitution of their business. And I just found that a little bit strange. And I said, but I'm a qualified funeral director. I've got a diploma in funeral directing. I've got a diploma in management. At the time, I've been in the industry for 27 years. Surely my qualifications will dictate. Now, I totally understand why they have to, because if I was a brand new person setting up funeral directors, if they were coming to check me, what are they checking me against? Because if I'm brand new and I've looked after no families, so I've got no paperwork, I've got no evidence, I've got nothing for them to see. So I totally get why they say they've got to do 15 funerals and look after people 15 times before, so then they can check what you're doing. But they should come and check at the minimum to make sure that the premises is set up right, and you are set up to be able to look after 15 funerals. Yeah. In the end, common sense prevailed, and they came to see me earlier, and the test, the inspection was rigid. It was
thorough. I mean, it's a good point that you make about the coming out to see, because you've got nothing tangible as funerals. That's because you've not done any. But the premises has to be up to standard, and I think that is a really big point, because where are you operating out of? Is it a garage, or you could have just literally a garage set up and working out of a living room, whereas you need to have that premises up to some really high standards.
But legally, you don't.
No, of course, you could do it in a garage.
I got a visit from like all other funeral directors did. So when the Roebuck story originally broke, just over 2 years ago, government asked local councils and local authorities to visit all funeral directors, and they came with a checklist of questions. And the guys that came to me were from Stockton Borough Council. I think one was a health and safety officer, one was a training standards officer. Lovely people. Had a quick look around, didn't really ask much questions until we sat down, made them a brew, and then they went through their process of questions that they were asked. And it was a case of, do you do this? Yes. Do you do that? Yes. Do you have a process for this? Yes. Do you have a process for that? Yes. And that's how it kind of went. Lovely guys, but at the end they were like, okay, we're pretty happy with everything that you're doing, and are you happy with what? And I said, well, no, not really. If this is how you're doing every single visit, you've not asked me to quantify anything. You've not asked me to prove any of my answers, and people could lie to you.
We had exactly the same. And the team that came out to us were exactly the same. They're from the council, but they had no knowledge whatsoever about funerals, and it was a checklist. They were asking questions, and as you say, you could just say anything. And as nice as they were were doing their job as they were asked to do,
Yes.
but literally had no funeral experience whatsoever. And really, there was one of the guys that came to us didn't really understand the questions he was asking, and that's another problem within that. Yes, they were doing the checks, great, but again, it wasn't as thorough as what it should be in my eyes.
So regulation needs to be thorough, and whoever the regulator is needs to employ people who are the inspectors that know what they're doing. So in Scotland, they are regulated now, and they have regulators, and they've just employed 3 more. I don't know all 3. Well, I know one of the 3. He used to work at the Co-op, so he's a funeral professional. He understands, and obviously he's been given the role of one of these inspectors. So that's a good sign, I would say, that in Scotland they're going down the lines of people that understand. But I think if in the future, when we're regulated and we get these inspections, they need to have teeth as well, because currently, if I was to get inspected, I'm due an inspection from the NAFD anytime soon. NAFD, not.
Please give me a shout.
Please come. They can come any day, to be fair. But it's a little bit overdue. And if they came and they didn't like a particular process or found anything that I was doing wrong, which I'm sure they wouldn't, but they would give me an action list of things that I had to. And if I didn't want to do that, I could just come out with the NAFD. I could just say, well, I'm not paying my subs, and I'll just come out, thank you.
And you don't have to be a member in the first place anyway.
No. So they come and they tell me I'm doing stuff wrong, and then I say, okay, well, I just won't be part of this anymore, and you can't do anything about that. That's not right. These regulators, once we're regulated and once the inspectors come, if people aren't doing things right, they should be shut down until they've done things right. If I went to a restaurant, you wouldn't go to a restaurant that had a 1-star food hygiene rating because there was something seriously wrong. They have to put things right until they've got that rating.
Yeah, that's the consequences.
Whatever happens in the future, they have to have teeth. Because currently, as much as I love the NAFD and I've got a great admiration for what they do, they haven't got any teeth. There will be funeral directors out there who know that.
And that just so that we're very balanced in the conversation we're having, it isn't the NFD's fault that they don't have any teeth.
Not.
They've never asked to have. That's never been their role. They're doing a great job to try and voluntarily create a code of standards.
They do it amazing. They do have high standards, but they've almost been thrown into this because they're the only, again, it's safe, but they're the only 2 that are recognised. So really, it's not up to them. But again, I'm hoping that things will change.
There is the British Institute of Funeral Directors.
Of course.
But I don't have, in my own admission, I don't know a lot about them. I probably should look into it a little bit more, but I've kind of always been kind of NAFD, really.
It kind of does feel like the more I've listened to things over the last, it's 2 years, it's kind of been going on for us in the funeral industry that we've been hearing about Robert Bush. And so, it does feel like it should be local councils or maybe Ofsted or somebody that has quite a powerful, as you say, and powerful role with teeth to go in and make changes. And it's just not there. But it is a huge task.
And then rate them. So this funeral director that is in your community is a 3-star rated funeral director. And these were the areas that they had to improve on their last inspection. This funeral director in that area is a 5-star rated funeral director. And that rating has to be put on their website, on their door.
It has to be everywhere.
It has to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And if they fail and they get 2 stars or 1 stars, families need to know about it and what they failed on. And what the measures were that they had to, and you know what, they put the measures in place, and then the inspectors come back and they get a 5-star review. But during the time where they're not, that should be public knowledge, really out there.
And we've always been, certainly on the podcast, we've been open and honest about things and how things work, and that's almost a duty to the public. Of you've got to be open and honest to how you've performed. And reputation is a big thing. People go to the companies because of their reputation. Oh, well, we had them; they were great. But behind the scenes, no one particularly knows. I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
I feel like we could talk for hours. Well, maybe this needs another episode. Maybe there's more to come out. Maybe the NAFD or any of those other organisations want to come on and have a chat with us about what they're doing and how they feel the solutions that could be devised to work for everybody. I guess what really matters to a lot of our listeners is, how do I make sure this doesn't happen to me or my loved one? So what would your advice and recommendations be in that first stage where somebody's thinking of choosing a funeral director? What are maybe some of the questions they should be asking? What are the things they should be looking for to be really sure that they're a good quality operator and their loved one's going to be looked after? So what should they be asking? And then secondly, if they have any concerns, what do they do with those concerns? Where do they go?
I think we've got it's a two-pronged answer. This, I think, one is, if somebody's had an expected death, they've probably got more time to think about this in the lead up. You know, somebody's been unwell, they're in a home, they're in a hospice, they're in hospital. They're probably thinking about this 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks before the person actually passes away. In that time, they could be reaching out to funeral directors. I get calls, and I'm sure, Carl, you will too, where they say, mum's on end of life, or dad's in a care home, and I don't really know what to do, but I want to ring and just kind of get my head around what happens and why. At that point there, they will get a feel for somebody, but a feeling's not enough. There is nothing stopping anybody out there saying, well, can I make an appointment to come down and see you? Yes, no problem. And when they're there, ask them, how is their loved one going to be looked after? Who's going to be looking after them? Where are they going to be cared for? And you know, what other processes do you have in place that families need, that the family need to be aware of? If somebody dies suddenly, it's probably another answer to that, because people panic and they're like, you know, they didn't expect any of this, and then suddenly they need a funeral director. My advice would be just to pause, even if it's just for a day. You know, at pausing for a day, still do what I just said before. Ring the funeral director, ask questions. Where's he look like? Funerals will take a little bit of time anyway. In that time, it's important that families can go to and feel comfortable with who they are choosing. But my advice, just to finish this off, would not be to choose a funeral director based on an advert or a website or whatever it might be. Go and speak to them. Go and meet them. Any funeral director worth their salt would welcome that conversation.
It's taking the words out of my mouth, genuinely has. The conversations you have with funeral directors and the feel you get when you instantly walk into a funeral home, and you would feel, you almost feel a little bit more at ease when you've spoken to a funeral director, and you have that instant rapport, the confidence with that whoever you've spoken to. And I think that is rightly, as you say, worth its weight in gold, definitely.
And the place people would go to if they felt uncomfortable, can they whistleblow? Can they report? Can they go anywhere to say, I just don't get a good feeling about this?
The NAFD, safe. The problem is, if they're not a member of that organisation, they probably won't be able to do anything. It's probably depending on what they're worried about. They could go to the Human Tissue Authority. They could go to the police if
a real red flag. Then the police will be a good call. The police will be a good call.
I can't think of anybody. Human Tissue Authority, NAFD. If they're not part of the trade association, then it just has to be the police. Or the coroner. The coroner might be able to direct them first.
Okay. Or you could come to Over My Dead Body and anonymously tell us if you feel like you're concerned about anybody. We can probably direct that in the right place. And David, I just want to pick up on one phrase that you used, which is about expected death. Every death is expected because, spoiler alert, we are all going to die. And this is something that Carl and I talk about all the time, is just being in control of the end of your own life. So you might not control how you die, but from 18, 19, 20 years old, you can be in control of what happens after you die. So even if you die in a road traffic accident or murdered, whatever the circumstances are, and it happens sooner than was expected, you could still have put plans in place. So mine and Carl's plea is always just write it down somewhere. If you've got a funeral director you'd like somebody to use, if you'd like to be buried or cremated, if you have a few ideas about your funeral, and that might change, but just lock that away somewhere, because you will need it at some point in the future.
That's a very good point.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for. Not that yours weren't. Wow, gosh, we have got through so much tonight. So there's just one point I wanted to come back to before we close off this episode, which goes right back to the beginning of the conversation and some of the things that Robert Bush was doing and giving families the wrong ashes, etc. We don't want to speculate, but may or may not have come about because of unclaimed ashes, which is a huge, huge issue in the UK, certainly in England. So, Carl, tell us a little bit more about unclaimed ashes. What are they? What's the problem? What do we do about it?
Well, this is a huge, huge subject and a huge topic and a really difficult one to unpick, I think. And it is a difficult situation, and funeral directors up and down the country really do work very hard in making sure that families get their loved ones' ashes back. And inevitably, some families don't want them back. They go into hiding, and funeral directors will look after them to a certain degree. Certainly in the funeral homes that I've worked in, nobody's thrown out or anything like that. There's no, we'll just take them back to the crematorium and have them scattered. And funeral directors do work very hard to find, unfortunately, when somebody dies and they're not claimed, their next of kin then pass away and they're no longer with us, you then face a problem of, well, who do we contact? And it is a huge problem. And I know, David, you'll probably do the same. You've worked hard to return ashes, and whether you put contracts in place or whether you do this, it's still quite a hot topic, really.
Yeah, I think what's important to put people's mind at ease is that, again, like all funeral directors, is the vast majority will treat cremated remains with the same love and care as they did when the person was there in their care as well. I think that's the first thing to probably acknowledge. The other is there's probably various reasons why people don't collect ashes. They might not mentally be ready. They might just get on with their lives and they don't want to reopen that wound again. I often try to discuss with families that it's probably best to deal with the ashes quite quickly after the service. Not too quickly you make the wrong decision. But my experience tells me that when people take too long to make a decision, it then gets harder and harder and harder.
And then that sometimes becomes the wrong decision as well.
Yeah. And then you've got the problem with ashes. But every funeral director over the country, and when I was at the Co-op as well, they will have an issue with unclaimed ashes for various different reasons, but they are looked after properly and they are, audited properly and
stored correctly.
What can we do? I think was your other question is, all funeral directors will have policies in place where they write to clients. They'll send them registered email, registered post, try and get in contact. But like you said, Carl, if the client's actually passed away, your former client, or they've moved out of the area, it proves to be very difficult. And your policy might say, if you haven't heard back from them within 6 months, you'll take them back to the crematorium and scatter them. But will you actually? Yeah. Because when it comes to doing that, that's something that can't be undone. And I think most funeral directors, even though it might say that in the policy,
don't just hang fire.
And that's probably because, why the industry's got so many of them, because we really don't have the heart to do actually what the policy says we're going to do. Because what happens if 2 days after we do that, somebody comes in and says, I've just been doing my family tree and I've just traced this back and we can't remember of what we've done, and we think, but there is an issue.
Do in that final point you said about even if we had a policy, we probably wouldn't enact it, just goes to underpin the whole of what this episode's been about, is that people in the funeral industry genuinely care about looking after the families that they care for, their loved ones that are in your care, right to the end of their life, and their life includes the ashes. So it just genuinely goes to show that you guys genuinely care. And I know Carl and David probably won't want to put a number on it because they're in the industry and it could be wrong, but I'm not a funeral director, so I can. But when you think about the scale of unclaimed ashes in the UK, it's probably in the millions. So millions of people's ashes up and down the country are sitting in funeral directors and funeral homes without being claimed. So my other big plea is, if you have loved ones' ashes that you haven't claimed, if you know of anyone, then maybe just have a think, maybe give your funeral director a call and start that conversation. That would be really helpful.
Funeral directors will have audited logs of who and where and when and everything, so it would be a very easy answer to give them. To
you're not pestering anybody. You're not, you know, it's not a nuisance. They want to hear from you.
And we want to return loved ones' ashes. That's part of the role, and that's almost the sort of final piece of the jigsaw. That's the end part of the service, and that's what we're here to do, is to look after people right from the beginning to the end.
So I feel like we have talked about so much. I feel like there's still so much to talk about. I still have about 10 questions on my list that we haven't got quite through yet, so maybe we will revisit this in the future. But just on a personal note, firstly, a massive thank you to Carl and to David for having the courage to come on and talk about this. It is a big thorny issue. We could have dodged it. We could have decided it wasn't for us, but it felt really important and we wanted to get you the right information. So thank you to both of you for your knowledge and your insight and your experience. But also, can I just say, we've talked very much about funeral directors today, but also from an officiant perspective, I've spoken about it before. Can we please have the same regulation or similar for celebrants and officiants? I am a member of the Fellowship of Professional Celebrants and also the Association of Independent Celebrants, both of whom do an amazing job, both of whom have a code of conduct that I try my best to uphold. But I don't have anybody checking. I don't have anybody telling me if I'm doing something wrong, if I could do something better, if I'm not treating families as well as I could be. And that's really important. I have to say, all of my fellow celebrants are brilliant, but all of us want to be as good as we possibly can be. And if we drive up everybody's standards, then families get better served. So, yeah, please can we have the same registration? We are caring for people's emotions at a really, really difficult and vulnerable time.
I think, in fact, just if I may, I think sometimes what you deal with when you, as a celebrant going into a family, will probably be dealing with something a little bit more vulnerable at times than we are, because you're sitting with a family in their own home, like we do, but we're there talking about practicalities. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're empathetic, and yes, we'll talk about the person, but we're dealing with logistics and practicalities and you know, organising the funeral, where you're dealing with people's feelings, life stories.
They're opening up.
They're really opening up.
Raw emotion.
And they might tell you things that if you weren't, you know, a decent person, that could take advantage of. So I feel that the celebrants is probably as important as funeral directors being regulated.
Thank you. And just some basics like a DBS check. So, you know, you're going into people's homes, you're going to see widows, elderly people, vulnerable people. They could leave the room to make a cup of tea and you could take anything out of their front room. And that terrifies me sometimes. That I have my DBS check, but not everybody does, because you don't have to. So yes, let's just, not to crack down on people, but to drive industry standards up all over. Let's just be better for families. One last question for you boys before we wrap up. If there was one good thing that could come out of the trauma of this experience, what would it be?
I think a bit regulation. We've said it, but I think more than that. I think you said it at the beginning. I think a huge, I'm not sure thank you is the word, a huge well done to the families for being brave enough to come out and share their experiences. I genuinely think it's going to make a huge difference. So if one thing this can bring is, let's make legacy funeral directors a legacy that this never happens in our industry ever again.
Yeah, it's a huge point. The families have been through so much, and then having to relive this over and over again in the press, see it everywhere, on the television, the news, you name it, it's everywhere. And that, for me, must be extremely traumatic, but it's only a good thing for the funeral industry, because from now on, standards will be going up. Funeral directors potentially will have their collars felt in some degrees, and it's sort of, it only can be good for the funeral industry, certainly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I would echo those thoughts and say thank you to the families. You have been incredible. Our thoughts, our hearts remain with you as you hopefully start to make a journey forward. And whatever that looks like for you, we wish you the very, very best with that. We understand this may have been a traumatic and difficult episode for some people. We've tried to keep it as light and as human as we possibly can while tackling a big old chunky one. But if we still haven't answered all the questions you've got, if there's anything else you want to know, pick up the phone to myself, Carl or David anytime, or drop us your messages on social media, and we will answer those in due course. In the meantime, have a great week. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again on air next week.
Thank you for listening, and we really hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this week's episode. Remember that you can get in touch with us anytime to ask a question, offer to be a guest, or to request that we bust a particular myth. You can get in touch via any of our social accounts over My Dead Poddy on Facebook, Insta, or TikTok. Or you can drop us an email at overmydeadpoddy@gmail.com. Just a reminder that whilst all of us work in the funeral industry, none of us are fully qualified grief counsellors. And therefore, if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed today, we highly recommend that you seek out professional or medical support to help you with those conversations. Should you need any support, please do get in touch and we can hopefully signpost you in the right direction, but we can't offer those services ourselves. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to bring you the next episode.